We guess some of you have been in this position before, sitting bored out of your mind in your bedroom, thinking, man, is this it? Is this all life has to offer? I need excitement, adventure, I need to challenge myself. You peer outside your window and see a grumpy-looking man mowing a lawn. 5 days a week, that guy wakes up early and goes to a job he hates to work with people he fears for money he spends on things he doesn't always need. That could be me in years to come, you think. You're still young. You have to seize the day. Get out in the world. Do something with your life. You call a friend, he picks up and you say, hey, how about we go trekking in the Himalayas? In this day and age, people leaving their homes in North America and Europe to travel across the world is hardly a daring adventure. 20 or 30 years ago, intrepid young travelers were finding beaches in Asia that had barely been seen by anyone but locals. They were doing India and then taking that perilous bus ride to Nepal, sitting with chickens in the next seat and squealing pigs tied to the roof. They had no smartphones with GPS. They had no way of getting in touch with friends or family quickly unless they spent ridiculous amounts of money on an international phone card. In those days, when you went backpacking around the world, you virtually went missing. It was, for sure, dangerous at times, and it was pure adventure. It was a very different experience from the backpackers these days who guzzle booze out of buckets on a beach while live streaming the entire event for the friends back home. It's hard to get lost these days. It's difficult to go MIA. So that's how it was for the man we're going to talk about today, a man who defied death, who doctors have called a miracle. His story of survival perhaps tops all others. We mean no disrespect, but he shouldn't be walking the streets today. He is super heroic, and so it's fitting that his nickname in the media is sometimes the Iceman. Back in 1991, when he left his house and embraced his mother and father, he knew he wasn't going to hear from them for a while. Going to Nepal from Australia was a really big deal for a man just aged 23, especially as he was going by himself. This young medical student named James Scott was armed with a guidebook and a backpack and took off from Brisbane in Australia to Nepal. His intention was not to hang around in bars in Kathmandu and get down with that famously smooth Indian hashish, but to hike into the Himalayan Mountains after doing a bit of training in a hospital. He was prepared in some ways because he hadn't spent his adolescence on his behind. He was keen on keeping fit and had trained at karate for 6 years before setting off on his trip. He was in very good physical shape, but his mental health was also very good. This would save his life. Saying that, you can be really fit and still starve to death or freeze to death at such a high altitude. There's a reason why when you walk around Kathmandu or the city of Pokhara, you can find a guide easier than you can find your own guest house room key. But no guides are involved in this story. Is there really a point in hiring a guide? Just don't go off trail. That's how a lot of people think. And that was what James Scott intended to do back in late December of '91. Just hit the hills and keep climbing. At first, he had a trekking partner, another medical student who had also been doing some work at the hospital in Kathmandu. When that was over, they decided to hit the mountains. Late December is about the coldest time to go trekking in the mountains in Nepal. The higher you go, the colder it gets, and everything is covered with ice and snow. As any expert will tell you today, trekking at this time of year can get a bit tricky, and if you intend to ascend by yourself, well, good luck with that. You could be looking at temperatures of -20 and lower, with a wind chill that feels like a ghost made of ice is walking through you. James did not stay at lower altitudes, and he did experience severe cold high up and during the night. The tea houses scattered around the hills were open, but since it was the off-season due to the cold, there were few other trekkers. The worst thing that can happen is you get stuck in a vicious blizzard, which makes it difficult to see anything, and that's exactly what happened to those guys. In no time at all, the two young men knew they were in trouble. James told his friend that they should turn back since it was too dangerous to keep climbing. The two disagreed, and James went off by himself. He wouldn't be seen again for a long time. He had the right gear, and he had some spare clothes in his backpack, but the only source of food he had with him was 2 chocolate bars. He decided to travel light, and his backpack only weighed about 22 pounds. He had a medical kit, 10 pairs of underwear and socks, lots of t-shirts, some long johns, some cotton pants, and a sweatshirt, as well as the gear he was wearing. He also had a camera and 4 books. Those books were The Silence of the Lambs, Great Expectations, The Lonely Planet Guide to Nepal, and A Guide to Trekking in Nepal. He'd had a map, but he'd given that to the trekking partner he'd split away from. When he failed to turn up in Kathmandu, his friends soon knew he was in trouble. They got in touch with his family back home, and they said they were sorry to say, but James was most likely lost in the mountains. As this was happening, James was looking for any sign of footprints, but he became more disoriented the more he moved. He then found a creek and followed that, which was a sensible thing to do. But as he carried on, he found himself in very dangerous terrain, full of steep slopes, and at a certain point he found himself in the worst possible position. To continue going up was dangerous, and he couldn't find the path from where he'd come. He was stuck. His family were hopeful he'd survive for a few days until he was found. He had sufficient medical training to know how to keep warm and how to fend off frostbite. His sister said she would go to Kathmandu, but before she did that, she got in touch with the president of the Himalayan Research Association in Kathmandu. That man told her that she should contact an expert mountaineer that lived in Nepal. He was Australian too, and his name was Carl Harrison. It was January 7th when she arrived in the city, and by that time her brother had been missing for 16 days. That was already a long time. The outlook was not good. 16 days in the mountains in freezing temperatures without food was enough to kill anyone. More days passed, and now the sister was hoping for a miracle. Generally, when people go missing for so long at that time of year, it means they've died. She even went to see a Buddhist Lama to ask him for help. The Lama told her where her brother might be. She said, "Is he still alive?" The Lama replied, "You'll meet your brother again." She probably wondered, okay, but alive or dead? A James frozen like a popsicle was not a James she wanted to see. The sister went to visit mountaineers and showed them the place on the map that the Lama had told her James was at. They weren't too sure he'd be there, and that was because there were no trails around that area. Why would he have wandered so far off from the trails? More days passed, and James was almost given up for dead. The winter snow and freezing winds were so bad it was almost impossible to search for him. His sister was told when the spring came they'd go in search of his body, so at least the family could bury him. That wasn't what she wanted to hear. Meanwhile, James was freezing his acorns off in an ice cave, a place where he could at least hide from the wind. He knew exactly how much ice to eat to keep himself from dehydrating, and he regularly checked the color of his urine. As a medical student, he was aware that too much ice might induce vomiting. His chocolate bars were now gone, and his only other source of food while he was lost was one small caterpillar. He was also aware of how to keep his head warm, the part of the body where most heat is lost. He kept his mind in shape by envisioning a rescue and never letting his hopes fade. He knew that by keeping positive, he could endure the experience. The problem was, as he starved, his body basically started eating its own fat reserves. After a few weeks, James became so weak, he could hardly move from his shelter, and if a helicopter should fly by, it would miss him. On day 40, he knew he was going to die. He attempted to walk away from his shelter, but after around 100 meters, he collapsed on the ground. He started retching, but nothing came out. This was the end. He felt at this point there was no hope, and rather than die slowly, he considered taking his own life. But how would he do it? He thought about using something from his medical kit to slit his wrists, but that seemed grim. He also knew that if he didn't eat any more ice, he likely would die in just 3 days. This is how he later described these final days in his shelter. "When I awoke, it was pitch black. The moon had turned again. I knew I'd given up, and I shouldn't have. I got up and tried to collect more ice, but it was too cold to eat. My mouth stuck to it. I thought it was too late." Little did he know that his sister hadn't given up. And in the skies, that mountaineer named Carl Harrison we mentioned was in a helicopter with a team looking for James. We should say at this point, they were looking for a body, not a living being. Harrison spotted something in the vast whiteness, and he was shocked when it moved. He couldn't believe his eyes. That's because James had heard the mechanical bird in the sky and had crawled out of his shelter. He dragged his colorful sleeping bag with him because that might be more easily spotted. His hopes then faded again when the helicopter flew off. James crawled back into his shelter, whereupon he urinated. The color was now black, but he had been seen. That helicopter just couldn't land. That evening, while lying in his shelter ready to die, James heard the first voice besides his own that he'd heard in 43 days. He thought he might be hallucinating, but the shouts got louder. James was now too weak to crawl out again, and so he shouted as best he could, "I'm under this rock." The next thing he knew, 2 Nepalese men were looking at him. They removed his hood and asked, "Are you James Scott from Australia?" He replied, "Yes." And then he burst into tears. He hadn't shed one tear since he'd been lost. The men hugged him. These were local guys who believed the mountains had a mystical power. They told James that he must be a god himself. No one, they said, has ever survived longer than 10 days out here in the winter. He was taken to a hospital and put on a drip. No solids, of course. He'd suffered a vitamin deficiency and severe malnutrition. But unbelievably, he didn't have frostbite. He is now Dr. James Scott, but because of his ordeal, there's still damage to his nervous system and his eyesight isn't so good. Still today, he sometimes has double vision. But he's optimistic and he's modest. After his time on the mountain, he said, "The lesson I've learned, simplistic as it might sound, is that no difficulty is impossible to overcome. I'm just an ordinary person who fell into an extraordinary situation." And now we have an extraordinary situation for you, choosing one of these 2 videos. We know it's tough to pick, but this one here or this one over here, we know you can overcome this extreme challenge.